Hello, sports fans, and welcome back to Ball Games and Beyond. I am your host, Evan Groat, and Ball Games and Beyond is brought to you by SportsNot.com. Please go out there and make sure you are subscribing and following to the SportsNot YouTube channel. Make sure you're smashing that notifications bell as well so that you are always getting all of the new content that we're bringing to you guys each and every day. And you can follow the audio version of this podcast as well by searching Ball Games and Beyond on your favorite podcasting platform. And you can follow me on X at eGroat5. And I'm excited about this week's show, guys, because we're going to be talking horse racing. That's right. The Preakness Stakes is this weekend on Saturday, the second leg of the Triple Crown. And all eyes will be on Mystik Dan as he looks to add the second jewel of the crown because he was the Kentucky Derby winner just a couple weeks ago. It's a short turnaround here to the Preakness. There's a lot of talk right now about Mystik Dan. It was a tough, hard-fought Kentucky Derby by Mystik Dan. Does he have enough gas left in the tank to get it done? We'll find out here on Saturday. We also got some news on Wednesday involving one of the horses that was in the field. Not just one of the horses, the morning line favorite. That's right, Muth, who is a Bob Baffert horse, was a scratch from the event. He's not going to run. He came down with a fever, and you never want to see that happen to the favorite in the race. That certainly takes a little bit of the excitement out of it. Bob Baffert was searching for his 9th Preakness win. He does still have another horse in the mix with Imagination. We'll see if he can get it done for Baffert. But once again, Muth, the morning line favorite, is a scratch from the event, and that certainly opens up the realms of possibilities as far as the outcomes of this race. But I think what everyone is looking to see is Mystik Dan. Can he get it done here again at the Preakness? We're going to be joined by our guest this week, Steve Bick, who is a radio host. He hosts At the Races daily, Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. on Sirius XM Radio. Steve does a great job. He's an expert on this. I've been tuning into him this week, and he's fired up and he's ready to go. And so we're going to talk to him about Muth being scratched. We're going to talk to him about maybe who that benefits. Is there a horse in the field that benefits from Muth not being there? Also, if you've been paying attention to the weather reports, it looks like that track could be a little bit sloppy, a little bit muddy, a little bit of rain in the forecast. Steve is broadcasting live this week from Pimlico Park, so we're going to get a weather update from him as well. You don't want to miss that conversation. Coming up next, after I get back from this quick break, so you don't want to go anywhere. Stay right there. All that and more coming up next on Ball Games and Beyond, brought to you by SportsNot.com. And we now bring in our guest for this week on Ball Games and Beyond. Joining us to talk about the second leg of the Triple Crown, the Preakness, this weekend at Pimlico Park in Baltimore, Maryland, is host of At the Races, Steve Bick. He hosts a Monday through Friday daily show, 9 to 12 a.m. Eastern Time on Sirius XM Radio. And Steve, we're happy to have you here with us. We're going to discuss the Preakness. It's a short turnaround for the Derby winner, Mystik Dan. But before we get to him, I do want to discuss the big news from the week, and that's Muth, who was the morning line favorite in this race, who was scratched Wednesday, came down with a fever. I just want to get some of your initial thoughts on that news.
Well, clearly it's a huge impact, and he was coming in here as seemingly the horse to beat. You have the Bob Baffert subplot, of course, not able to participate in Derby and at Churchill, and refocusing, his horses toward this opportunity. Last year he won it with National Treasure under, similar circumstances. So to lose Muth, and of course for Amr Zadan, the owner, between Medina Spirit's disqualification and then the frustration of not being able to participate, he's been loyal to Baffert, and all of Baffert's owners this season decided not to send their horses elsewhere to try to get Derby qualifying points. And the hope is that this will be the last year of this suspension by Churchill against Baffert. Meanwhile, this is really a tough break. I think a lot of people were looking forward to this showdown. Muth beat Mystik Dan in the Arkansas Derby, and so you had that as a side plot, and it also changes the pace picture considerably because Muth, like most Baffert horses, of course he still has imagination involved. They're going to set the pace, and they're going to be on the front end of the field. So taking Muth out takes quite a bit of pace out. That affects the horses that are typically in the back of the pack that are going to come with a late run. So this is a multi-pronged circumstance that changes the complexion. It obviously makes
Go ahead.
Well, it makes Mystik Dan the favorite. That sort of changes. I mean, it doesn't change. It doesn't change the pressure aspect, but there is a certain degree of being the Derby winner coming to Baltimore and not being the favorite. Now he will be the favorite, and it doesn't change McPeak and Brian Hernandez their approach to the race, but it is a different. It's a slightly different circumstance. And of course, the other part of this is, there's some horses in here like Chad Brown's Tuscan Gold, as Chad tries to win for the third time, third Preakness. His price is going to be cut in half. I mean, he'll be as low as 3-1 now. So there's a lot of things that Muth's scratch. There's a trickle down effect and a ripple effect, obviously, and we'll see what it does on Saturday. And I think we're still all kind of absorbing, what this means and how the race changes in terms of who, takes Muth's spot for pressure and so forth. So there's a lot of moving parts to this.
Yeah, you mentioned the change of the pace of the race, and that is one of the things I wanted to ask you about, so I'm glad you brought that up. Does this also change, I guess, the strategy for the jockeys going into the race? Because, just a couple of days ago, they're thinking the horse Muth would be involved in this race, and as you mentioned, he's a horse that likes to set the pace, set the tone, be a front runner. So now for these jockeys, does that kind of change the mindset and the strategies for them and how they run this race?
Well, certainly, and under the original configuration of this 9-horse field, the expectation is that Muth would go forward from the 4-hole. Imagination, the other Baffert with Frankie Dettori, would probably shadow him, and as they go down the stretch, kind of come together into the first turn. Without Muth's presence, you got to assume certainly that one of D. Wayne Lucas's runners, most probably Seize the Gray and Jaime Torres, you got to expect that they'll be forward. I got a feeling that Tyler Gaffalione with Tuscan Gold, he doesn't have the speed to be involved early, but I do think that Gaffalione's going to try to gain early position with him, and by being in the 8-hole and Imagination to his right, Gaffalione's got an opportunity to kind of stretch Imagination a little further down the stretch probably than he would have under the original set of 9. So you're going to want to watch the horses that are to the right of Mystik Dan to see who gets aggressive. And the guess is that Seize the Gray and Imagination, they go forward. And I got a feeling that Gaffalione, I don't think they necessarily want to use Tuscan Gold early, but I think you will see him at least try to gain position before he maybe finds himself more or less parallel to Mystik Dan. And I think that's what you're going to end up getting here. Seize the Gray, Imagination, they'll be on the lead going into the turn. And then I think you'll have Mystik Dan and Tuscan Gold sitting 3rd and 4th. The rest of this group, probably, I'm not sure where Rosario ends up with Just Steel. He's a bit of a wild card. When he rode him at Churchill in a win near the end of his 2-year-old year, Rosario actually had him fairly close. So Just Steel may sit 4th or 5th. The rest of this group are horses that are going to drop out of it. including Catching Freedom for Brad Cox, who was fourth in the Derby. Muggatu from the rail for Jeff Engler. He's going to be the longest shot in the field. He's going to drop out of it. Uncle Heavy is a horse that doesn't have early foot either for Butch Reed. And he gets Irad Ortiz, who loves to come with one run. So you're going to have the three inside horses drop back. Mystik Dan, finding the same kind of position that he found with Brian Hernandez. I don't know if he wants to be right on the rail. With all the rain we're getting, the rail might not be the right place to be, but you'll see him forward, maybe in the two path, and Chad Brown, Tuscan Gold. And that's basically that actually is a pretty good picture. You're doing me a big favor, Evan, having this discussion because it's helping me formulate, how this race unfolds.
Well, you painted a pretty good picture for us there of how this race may shake out. But when you look at the field of now 8 horses, can you pick one specifically that you think benefits the most from Muth no longer being in the race?
Mystik Dan. It's Mystik Dan. Without a doubt, because there's still going to be whatever pace is in front. And if anybody else joins the fray, like we suggested, the second Lucas horse, and there is a possibility that Just Steel is ridden for a little bit of speed. Rosario has got a very light touch, and Joel is very good at finding position. So he may be, like I said, might be the one that adds to the pace. But all of that, basically, Mystik Dan was the second choice coming in to the Muth, who was the favorite. So with Muth gone, Mystik Dan is obviously the horse that benefits. And, it's one less horse that Brian Hernandez has to pass at some point later in the race. A horse that certainly would have been in front of him under the original configuration. So Mystik Dan benefits considerably. And I think, his chances to go to Saratoga for the Belmont as a dual classic winner, I think they went up considerably this morning.
Yeah, so speaking of Mystik Dan, all eyes will be on him now as he looks to get the second jewel of the crown here, the Triple Crown. Do you have any concerns for him? I mean, it was a grueling, hard-fought race in the Derby, the closest Derby we've seen in a very long time. Do you have any concerns with how much gas is left in the tank for Mystik Dan?
Yeah, it's funny that question came up this morning on my show, and a lot of people and savvy horsemen noted how reticent Kenny McPeek was on Sunday morning, and wisely so. I mean, any good horseman is going to say, we will wait and see how he comes out of this race. Now, Saturday night. After Derby, he didn't eat. He left. He didn't eat. I shouldn't say he didn't eat. He ate. He left 3 quarts of feed, and that's an indication of a horse that has been physically drained. He did eat up on Sunday, and then by Wednesday when he went back to the track, I was there Sunday morning, the next morning, and I stayed in Louisville till Tuesday. By Monday, when Kenny was with me, post race for the conversation, he felt a lot better about how Mystik Dan was acting. And then by Wednesday, when he went back to the track, you could see on Wednesday, his first day back on the track, Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, he walked. They basically keep him around the shed and they just walk him on the shank. On Wednesday, he went back to the track and he was full of energy. Not just full of energy, he had his ears up, and you could see that he wanted to actually do more. And that is a pretty typical MO for 24, 48, 72, 96 hours after exertion. And of course, a mile and a quarter that's like having 5 workouts for a horse. So he's at peak fitness, and every day that you've seen him since, he has looked absolutely as good as he looked going into Derby. So, I mean, if he gets beat, it's not going to be because he's fatigued. In fact, the record of Derby winners coming here to Baltimore 2 weeks later is very good because they're absolutely at the peak of their fitness. And you're much better off having a horse come out of Derby like that and running back in 2 weeks than trying to wait 5 weeks for the Belmont. And in this case, the Belmont at Saratoga, because they're fit, they're good now, and you run them. And the record of Derby winners in the Preakness is outstanding.
We are joined by Steve Bick, host of At the Races. You can hear that show Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 12 a.m. 12 p.m. Eastern time on
3 hours is enough. They're not going to keep me on for 27 hours.
Well, I'll tell you what, Steve, I've been listening a lot this week, and I really enjoyed the show, so I think I could listen for 20 hours. You do a great job there on the show.
Appreciate it.
Steve, I want to get your opinion on pole positioning. I did a little research. I've heard some people say that it doesn't really matter where the horse's pole position is. Some people disagree with that. Since 1909, when the starting gate was first introduced at the Preakness, it has been the number 6 position that has produced the most winners with 17. Now that's Seize the Gray. He'll be starting from that position this year. But what's your take on the importance of pole positioning in major Triple Crown horse racing events?
Well, the Derby's the only race really that you worry about that. Because you got typically 20 horses or 17, 18, 19 horses, and they've got, basically 1,200 yards to find themselves and gain position. Same thing somewhat here. You've got the entire length of the stretch for the horses to, find a spot where they want to be. From a historic perspective, you really shouldn't worry about the posts and those kinds of stats in this era. There's a couple of things that work. For number one, for years, Pimlico had a notorious inside bias. The rail basically was a fabulous place to be. So whoever got to the rail had tremendous advantage here for the longest time. And that, over the last 20 years, that has kind of gone away. The track is much more fair than it used to be. The other thing that is very different at Pimlico than almost any other racetrack in the country is, and you use the word pole position, which makes you think of NASCAR, and actually NASCAR and any auto racing, there is a parallel here. There's grading on the racetrack, the same as there is on an auto oval, and Pimlico has a very low grade, about an 8% grade as opposed to 15% on most racetracks. And that can make it hard for the horses on the outside to corner when just the centrifugal force carries them, is carrying them out. When there's more banking, it's easier for them to turn. So because Pimlico has got kind of a flatter surface and the crown of the racetrack is flatter, it's tougher for horses from the outside to negotiate the turns. And that's what makes Pimlico unusual, and it's why Pimlico got this phony reputation of tight turns. The turns are no different, actually. The sweep of the oval is no different than the Churchill. But because of the grading, it's harder to corner. So horses from the outside are disadvantaged, typically, going into especially the first turn. That's not going to really come into play in this field because the horses, as we said, the horses in the 1, 2, 3 path, basically, Muggatu and Uncle Heavy and Chasing Freedom, they're going to drop out of it. So that leaves 5 horses to the outside, and we know that 2 of them are going to probably go forward. So that's 5. So we have 3 horses in the middle. So you'll probably have 2 horses leading into the turn, 3 horses basically sitting 3rd, 4th, and 5th, and 3 horses. So nobody's going to be at any disadvantage in terms of lost ground or the inability to corner successfully. So this really is, in this particular case, the 1 through the 8, or in this case 9 with 8 horses, isn't going to make a difference.
Steve, I know you've been broadcasting live from Pimlico this week on your show. What's the latest on the weather report? I keep reading rain in the morning, possibly throughout the afternoon. Could this make for a muddy track? And if so, how would that affect the way the race is run? And is there any horse that you think might benefit from
Mystik Dan?
Mystik Dan.
And all this, and whatever direction we're going, it goes through Mystik Dan.
All right.
He's already proven in that Southwest, in that tremendous performance in the Southwest, he likes a wet track. There's really no way to tell right now, Evan. What are we? We're 72 hours out. There's going to be some rain. The chances are anywhere from 45 to 70%. Some models seem to have some rain late in the afternoon. Some have light rain, throughout the day. I don't think we're going to know any better than we do midweek than we will until, let's say, Friday afternoon. Louisville is usually a place where the weather is so volatile, you don't even think about it. I would say by Friday we'll have a better feel for how much rain we're going to get. I would anticipate some. I mean, there'll be some moisture in the track, and Mystik Dan benefits without a doubt.
Last one I have for you here, and then we'll get you out of here. From a betting perspective, when you look at the field of horses and you look at the odds, are there a couple names that pop out at you as good value that you may want to bet some money on?
Well, Tuscan Gold was going to be the value with a horse like Muth drawing 8 to 5, 7 to 5 kind of money. With him gone, Mystik Dan is not going to draw, I think, that much more. I mean, he might be as low as 2 to 1, but I think 5 to 2 is probably more likely. So you're going to lose whatever value you were looking for on Tuscan Gold. I'm sure people are going to try to figure out a way to get the Wayne Lucas horses involved at a decent price. They'll be in the 8 to 12 to 1 ranges. Catching Freedom, I would. I mean, he's going to be third choice probably. He's not going to offer any value. I don't know. You're going to laugh. If Mystik Dan is 5 to 2, if he's 5 to 2, that's a good value on him. I mean, Catching Freedom to me is going to be too low a price to really key off of. I don't think this is going to be a fabulous individual betting race. I mean, obviously, compared to the Derby, it's not going to be. As a race that ends big multi-race wagers, pick 3, pick 4, pick 5s, plus the 2-day, the Black-Eyed Susan Preakness double. There's 2 pick 5s that are running 2 days that end on with the Preakness. In those races, I think that's where you're going to have to get your value. You're going to have to use the other races that come before or the ones that come Friday and Saturday and get your value there. I think it's going to be very tough to unless you're somebody that plays $100 trifectas, $20 supers, and there's nothing that's a legitimate approach, but it's not the Derby in terms of opportunity.
I was thinking of one more thing, Steve, before I let you go here. I may be getting a little ahead of myself here, but you seem pretty confident in Mystik Dan this weekend. When you look at Mystik Dan, is he an unlikely horse to win the Triple Crown? Like, if I had asked you a few weeks ago prior to the start of the Kentucky Derby that he would win the Triple Crown, what would you tell me?
There's from a couple of different vantage points, he would not have been a likely candidate per se, and part of that was pedigree. Golden Sense had not had a classic winner. This is Golden Sense's first classic winner. He's a son of Into Mischief. He's been a very good, useful sire, mostly of middle distance type horses. But as it happens, the dam was by Colonel John, a very stout family. Him and a lot of his brothers, were, in fact, one of his brothers won the Dubai World Cup, 1.25 miles. And Colonel John was a very good, solid, citizen himself as a route goer. So from a pedigree standpoint, and Kenny McPeak did say that the way the horse traveled, he was going to be a good candidate, for a classic distance, but still, you didn't necessarily expect it from him. And people were going to want to take, I think, a stand against him in this race because he had such a advantageous trip in the Derby. He had the kind of trip that Mind That Bird had, the kind of trip that Street Sense had, where they were saving ground, the Calvin Burrell, every step of the way, and everything worked out. I mean, typically, that's not going to necessarily happen. But Brian Hernandez Jr. happens to be a jock that has got very good judgment when it comes to positioning his horse, and he made up his mind from the 3-hole that he was going to take advantage and save as much ground as possible. And, he got that tiny opening when Joel Rosario just came off the rail a tiny bit with Track Phantom. That opened the door. Sometimes that door doesn't open. And now all of a sudden, you've got less and less ground to make a move. At this point now, you got to try to find a seam and go out and go around horses. So, the mentality of trip handicappers is that Mystik Dan got, a little lucky. Yes, he ran a great race. He attended a pace. He's the only horse that stayed close to the pace in the Derby that was there at the end. Everybody else that was first, second, third, fourth, fifth, even seventh, eighth, and ninth, they all ended up in the back of the pack. I mean, Fierceness ended up 15th. The favorite ended up 15th, attending that pace. Mystik Dan attended that pace and finished, and that's a mark of a nice horse. Brian is going to, I think, probably try to give himself a couple of more choices on Saturday. At this point, I'm not going to say I'd be surprised if he doesn't win. But I won't be surprised that he wins and wins well in here. This is a solid field, and it was a very interesting race. With Muth, it's a little less shiny right now with the Arkansas Derby winner not in here. So he really has an outstanding chance. I think Kenny McPeak certainly would have told you that he thought that Mystik Dan was a horse that could negotiate all 3 races. And of course, he's not going to have to go 1.5 miles in New York.
Right.
It's 1.25 miles because of the configuration at Saratoga.
Right.
To me, that doesn't take away at all from the Belmont. I'm sure. If he does win all 3 of these races, there's going to be a whole crowd of people that say, "Oh, there's an asterisk." I'm sorry. If you win a 10 furlong race, 1 mile and 3/16 race, and another 10 furlong race in 5 weeks, that's an accomplishment that will stand up against the previous 13 winners.
Well, it'll be all eyes on Mystik Dan this weekend. And I tell you what, if the Preakness is half as good as the Kentucky Derby is, or was, I should say, then we're in store for a really good event on Saturday. Steve Bick, we appreciate the time. We appreciate all of your insight. Go out there and listen to Steve on Sirius XM Radio, 9 to 12 Eastern Time in the mornings, Monday through Friday at the races with Steve Bick. Steve, thank you for the time, and keep up all your great work.
Evan, thanks so much. Thanks for having me.